students, in this lesson we are going to talk about the advantages of the British and their disadvantages, and the advantages of the colonials and their disadvantages. And we're also going to talk a little bit about the formation of the Continental Army and the involvement of women within the Revolution. I've decided to take Chapter 6, Lesson 1 and break it into 2 lessons. So today with Part 1, we're going to talk about these advantages and disadvantages, and then Part 2, we're going to talk about some more specifics in terms of the battles that actually occurred early on in the Revolution. So let's get started. The British seem to have the edge on this conflict from the get-go. They had the most powerful navy in the world, a well-disciplined army, and the wealth that came along with having a whole empire. There are also, 8 million strong population of Britain. The colonies had a population of 2.5 million. On top of that, most of the military was untrained militia, and the navy was almost non-existent. And of that 2.5 million, not all of them supported the war for independence. Some, like Quakers, were pacifists, and it's estimated that between 1/5 and 1/3 of the colonists were loyalists, also known as Tories. So they were loyal to the crown and not the patriot cause. Some of these loyalists depended on Britain to make a living, so we were messing with their money. And others just didn't think that the grievances against Britain were severe enough to resort to warfare. In general, there were more Tories in the southern states, and there was a lot more patriotism focused in the New England area. I think that's where Boston was, so they'd be closer to all those shenanigans that went down up there. This could make things awkward because, in a fashion, the Civil War was not only a war of the colonies versus what they considered to be a foreign power, but a bit of a civil war because, there were towns where parts of the population were patriots and some were loyalists. In fact, there were households that were divided over the war for independence. So that could make things bad, and there would be civil violence at times. Let's talk about the Patriots. They did have some advantages. For one, Tom Brady deflated the football slightly so he could get a better grip. A kid, football joke, had to throw it in there, couldn't help it. What the colonial Patriots did have as an advantage was they did have home field advantage. They knew the land better. They didn't have long supply lines. The British had to send their soldiers and supplies all the way across the ocean. That got expensive, and it was time-consuming and tedious. Also, there was the question of motivation. There were times where the militias and the colonials, the Continental Army, was literally defending their homes and families, whereas the British soldier was being paid to be there. They were on the attack. Also, you have the Hessian mercenaries, the German auxiliaries that the British hired, and they were straight-up mercenaries. They didn't have any skin in the game other than they were being paid to be there, and maybe their reputation was on the line. But the cornered man fights viciously, and the man paid to fight doesn't. So, the colonials had those advantages. They also had the man with a plan, the master of disaster, the commander of the Continental Army, George Washington. There he is, looking furious. Let's talk about the Continental Army for a minute. After the Declaration of Independence was signed, the Continental Congress served as, the colonial government. The problem was the colonies didn't really want to cede any power to a colonial government because they had just taken their power back from Parliament. So they weren't really down with that. This caused some problems because the Continental Congress didn't have the power to raise taxes. Any money they had was basically given to them by the states, voluntarily. In a lot of ways, the Revolution was kind of like 13 allied different countries fighting one large country. A great deal of the colonial fighting forces consisted of militia. Now, militia lack mobility because they like to stick to home. If you're in the Virginia militia, you're not going to go fight in New York. They also had a lack of discipline. They weren't professional soldiers. If you've ever seen how they fight back then, they stand in open fields in ranks and shoot at each other until somebody runs away. or they do a bayonet charge, but usually somebody runs away. That takes nerves of steel, and those kind of nerves takes a lot of training and discipline, which is something they didn't have quite yet. It was crazy forms of battle. So the Congress needed this mobile professional army, so they created the Continental Army, which is an army for the whole colony, sort of like the same as the army we have now, the active army. They relied on the states to recruit for this Continental Army. It's sort of I won't call it international, but like I said, instead of being like the army of militia that belongs to Virginia, it was an army for the whole country. There were a couple problems with this. Number one, the original enlistment periods were only a year, so the war was going to last more than a year, and a whole bunch of men wanted to leave after their 1 year, and Washington really needed them for the duration of the war. So they did start to sign men up for 3-year enlistment terms, but the problem was a lot of men didn't want to do that. They had farms and families they wanted to get back to. So retention was a big problem in the Continental Army. Also, there was a lack of experienced officers to lead the army within the colonies. There were some that had experience in the French and Indian War, like George Washington, but there weren't a lot, and as a result, you had a lot of inexperienced officers initially in the Continental Army, as well as enlisted men, but mark my words, by the end of the war, they'd all be pretty salty and have a lot of experience. Now, a quick note on ladies of the Revolution. Women in combat is a controversial topic even today. During colonial times, men did all the fighting, but women were able to serve in other ways, and even at times disguise themselves as men so that they could serve. Margaret Corbin of Pennsylvania went with her husband in the Continental Army and took his place in battle when he fell. Molly Pitcher McCauley carried water to the wounded men on the battlefield. And then you have Deborah Sampson of Massachusetts. She disguised herself as a man so that she could serve as a soldier. For more on women and their roles in the American Revolution, I've attached 2 links here and here. Now on the next page is your quiz. It's nothing crazy, but you get multiple attempts. If you've read the lesson, then you'll be good to go. Always read the book, the lesson in the book as well, in the digital book. And that's it for today. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a good one.